Thank you, everybody, for coming to this afternoon's session on Health Insight, what is new and what is next. So I'd like to begin by just introducing myself for a minute. My name is Ben Schlanger, and I'm the product manager for Health Insight. This is my first time meeting many of you in person, but I'm sure I've probably spoken on the phone or through email with some of you. My first 5 years at InterSystems were spent in the WRC, debugging issues and supporting customers on each product of the HealthShare suite. And I'm sure most of you are already quite familiar with Health Insight, but in case anyone is here to learn about what it is, I'll give a quick introduction. So within the HealthShare product suite, we have Unified Care Record, which is able to take in massive amounts of clinical data and a few other data types from many different sources in many different formats. It transforms the data and stores it in this very clean, normalized healthcare data model. And the data model for Unified Care Record is optimized for use cases that pull all of the data for a particular patient at a time. So Unified Care Records data model is excellent for something like get me all clinical data for the patient Don Woodlock. The Health Insight product takes all of the clinical data that exists in Unified Care Record and it represents it in a relational data model that is optimized for more population-level access of the data. The data itself is stored in SQL tables and in cubes. And of course, when you have an entire HealthShare federation's worth of clinical data in a very easily queryable format, you can do some very cool things with it, like population health analytics, cohort identification, and advanced clinical notifications. So now that we're up to speed on what Health Insight is, I'd like to cover what's new in the last few releases. So it's been a while since our last global summit, so I'm going to be covering some of the new features in Health Insight 2021.1, 2021.2, and our latest and greatest 2022.1, which was released just last month. So some of the best new features since including 2021.1, we now support time zone offsets. Actually, before I get into this, how many people were at the analytics presentation just about an hour ago? Show of hands, anybody? Okay. So Alex McLeod covered some of these broadly in analytics, but I'll go a little more specific here in Health Insight. So we now support time zone offsets. Previously, Health Insight only included the date and local timestamp data, but we now have additional fields in all of our tables for UTC timestamps. We've also beefed up our built-in COVID-19 demo dashboard. We have more cube queries built in, we have better controls in the widgets, and you can also build the COVID-19 cube or cubes as a background job. We have a new option on the registry that allows you to send analytics queue requests through their own dedicated business operation. Previously, it all just went through this hub management operation that shares workflows with other tasks. So separating it out into its own one streamlines the process and also prevents, perhaps a backup in one affecting other parts of the system. Very excited about the updates that we've made to medical claims and just medical or claims data in general. Claims data can now populate procedures and diagnoses, and we've added new source tables to the Health Insight data model for things like pharmacy claims, billing notes, and process notes. All of these updates are in line with updates that have been made in the Unified Care Record model. And for all of these claims tables, we've added additional indices for better performance and optimized querying. We also have support for two new products in the HealthShare suite, or rather the InterSystems suite of products. We have support for InterSystems reports and for InterSystems adaptive analytics. So the former, InterSystems reports, is a more modern, robust reporting solution. It's very nice, connects right to the IRIS databases in Health Insight, and it's actually very straightforward to implement. The second one, InterSystems Adaptive Analytics, you can think of as a sort of virtual data model, business-oriented virtual data model between InterSystems IRIS databases and popular business intelligence and artificial intelligence tools. I will say the support for Health Insight with adaptive analytics is a little bit limited at this time. So for current releases, it's more for things like proofs of concept to demonstrate some capabilities. If you want to do it with more of a production environment, please talk to your account team first. And last but certainly not least, we have support for something called System Index, which deserves its own slide. So System Index is a brand new piece of infrastructure that is coming out in the HealthShare suite. It is going to improve performance for many different HealthShare products, but its first integration is with Health Insight. And with Health Insight, it acts as the feeding mechanism, feeding data from Unified Care Record into Health Insight. So it functions, you can think of it as sort of an alternative to the feeder gateway that you all know and I hope love. It offers faster processing than the feeder gateway architecture. It also reduces some of the load on the registry by taking over some of the workflows and bookkeeping that goes through the registry currently. It also offers a centralized location for monitoring things like workflows, throughput, warnings, and errors within the data feed. And it also offers more consistent and precise control of data feed from each of the edge gateways. I do want to point out, though, that System Index support in 2021.1, the recently released one, is only in a pilot right now for new customers, a select number of new customers for Health Insight. So if you are a customer who is not yet using Health Insight and you're interested in this System Index, please speak to me or your account team. If you're an existing Health Insight customer, stay tuned because future releases will include more support. So now that I've covered what's new up to the present, I'd like to dive a little bit into what's coming up in the next couple releases. I do want to point out that this is a roadmap and it is subject to change. Notice the little red bar on the bottom of the slide. Roadmap plans are forward-looking and subject to change. But let me jump into this. We have 4 major priorities on the roadmap for the next few releases. The first one is just getting System Index out for general availability. We also want to look into faster data ingestion, which is something I know almost all of our Health Insight customers will be looking forward to. We're going to continue making enhancements to the Health Insight data model, and we're going to implement sharding within Health Insight officially. So again, the top one on our list is this System Index general availability. Like I mentioned before, System Index is going to be a major improvement to the data feed architecture for Health Insights. It's going to, or it's a more elegant and straightforward solution and way of doing it. It's also faster, and it opens up some exciting new capabilities. My favorite of these new capabilities is being able to support multiple Health Insight instances, but each one a sort of first-class Health Insight instance. The existing product, or older versions of the product, do allow support for multiple Health Insight instances from a single unified care record. It's through a mechanism called persistent requests, which really treats one Health Insight instance as the primary or the main one or the first class one, and the other instances are just sort of downstream from that. Whereas with System Index, you can have multiple Health Insight instances, each one a sort of primary or each one a sort of first class one. And of course, this additional capability and additional flexibility allows for some very cool use cases. Just one simple example may be maybe one of those Health Insights instances is massive and holds all of the data from Unified Care Record. And you may want to have multiple sort of parallel Health Insights that are subsets of the data for whatever use case you may have. And like I mentioned before, System Index offers a more centralized location for a lot of monitoring. We're going to continue working on making that monitoring even better. Right now, or rather the 2022.1 release of System Index is really more of a minimum viable product, like I said, for a few pilot customers, but we're going to be spending the next few months getting System Index's feature parity or feature set up to parity with the feeder gateway ingestion model. and of course responding to customer feedback as well. And our next big priority is, like I said, faster data ingestion. We want to significantly improve data ingestion performance in Health Insights. Our goal is to be able to take any customer, no matter how large their unified care record is, and be able to load it entirely, from nothing into Health Insight within 14 days. So we're going to be prioritizing especially bulk loads of data, but all data ingestion is going to be improved. System index is, of course, going to play a big part in this, but we're looking into other code optimizations as well. One particularly exciting one is improving horizontal scaling of data ingestion. I don't know how many of you were at Benjamin DeBoe's earlier presentation about horizontal scaling. It gave an excellent example of all of it. But essentially, when we have a heavy load of data coming in, we're going to be able to horizontally scale up, or essentially spin up parallel resources as needed, and then once it's less needed, be able to, again, automatically and seamlessly spin down those additional resources. And lastly, for data ingestion improvement, there are several places in the Health Insight data ingestion and data processing where it's a little bit processor intensive. Some of these are very necessary features, but some of the heavy processing, maybe some of them are rarely used by customers. Maybe they were implemented to chase a particular customer use case. So we're going to be reviewing these more intensive, post-processing and similar tasks, and ones that are maybe rarely used, we may look into removing just to streamline the data ingestion process. As we do with every release, we're going to continue making updates and enhancements to the Health Insight data model, in particular keeping up with updates that have been made in the Unified Care Record data model. So the two biggest ones, Unified Care Record now supports more payer data, specifically keeping up with the FHIR DaVinci payer exchange standard, which many of you may know as PDEX. So Unified Care Record has made this update, and Health Insight will as well. Another one, the US CDI standard. Again, many of you may already be familiar with the US CDI standard. It's becoming more important in the world of interoperability and health information exchanges. Unified Care Record supports it, and we will as well. And the last major priority that I want to talk about is implementing sharding within Health Insight. Again, some of you attended Benjamin DeBoe's presentation on horizontal scaling. Sharding is a big part of that. For anyone who doesn't know about sharding within Iris, the idea is that you can break up very large instances into several smaller, more manageable portions that we call shards. So within Health Insight, we're going to be breaking up the storage and the processing of Health Insight. So instead of one massive instance, it's spread across multiple Iris instances. This improves performance and scalability. It also gives us some options for expanding without requiring downtime. Sharding may require some changes to the data model, but we will sort of cover all of that well whenever it is actually released. And now that I've spoken about Health Insight sort of as it is and as it may be or hopes to be in the future, I'd like to hand things over to my colleague Jonathan Wald, whose team has been working on some very exciting capabilities that are built on top of Health Insight. John, unfortunately, could not be here in person, so he is connecting remotely. Can we get John up on the middle screen here? Hello, John. Looking good? Can you hear us?
Great.
Can you see us?
All right. Ready for me to go?
Yep. Please go ahead, John.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Ben. And I will just briefly introduce myself. My name is John Wald. I'm a clinical product manager with HealthShare, and I've spent 3.5 years working on Health Insight in various ways. First as a product manager, and now in the area of Health Insight solutions, which is what I'm going to be talking about for the next few minutes. So if we can go to the next slide. The agenda for my portion is I want to talk about our work developing member lists and analytic tools for member lists, data-driven member lists, which are also known as cohorts. And we are developing a modular approach to this, which I will describe. We'll be using a diabetes quality measures as our example, and that's the focus of a current proof of concept. And hopefully the benefits to you of this are, one is you get a sneak peek into some important work that we're doing. And the second is I'm going to ask at the end for you to think about any use cases that are important to you, and perhaps sharing them with us, and perhaps considering working with us on a proof of concept. And so just to begin motivating this, what I wanted to do is say a couple things. First of all, many analytic use cases really begin with cohort identification. It's, if you're doing quality improvement, you need to identify the group of patients or members that are the focus of your project. If you're trying to do performance measures or quality measures, you need the list of people. If you're doing research and you need to identify eligible patients for a study, or even decide whether you can apply for a grant and you have the patients for a study, you can stay back here. That's perfect. I'll let you know when to advance. Those are all reasons to begin identifying a list of patients. So this idea of data-driven member lists, we think, has a broad appeal. The second thing I wanted to mention is, think about analytics, think about what's hard about analytics. And we know there are at least three things that are really hard about analytics. One is it's a lot of steps. So how can we reduce those? The second is it usually requires a lot of expertise, and not everybody has that kind of expertise at their elbow. And the third is coding skills. It's not always easy to find people with analytics expertise, but who can also code. So we're trying to offer some solutions that will produce improvements in those areas. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to use diabetes as our example here. And many organizations, whether they're payers or providers, or in some way involved in accountable care relationships, are trying to figure out which of my members are well controlled or up to date in areas that are important for diabetes. Or on the right side, who are the ones that are poorly controlled or they're overdue for tests, or maybe they're even just in a near miss category, but I want to identify them. So it's a question of, how do I find those members? So if we go to the next slide and drill into the diabetes example a little bit more, I'm particularly interested in gaps in care. So which of my members are missing a hemoglobin A1C test, kidney testing, blood pressure observations, retinal eye exams? Who's missing those? Because if they're missing those, I'm going to get sort of dinged on my performance metrics. Also, I want to know who's in good control and poor control around hemoglobin A1C, which is a test of glucose control, and also blood pressure. You know, is it high? Is it normal? And each of these areas you can think of as having SQL queries behind it. So to answer questions about this, I have to start kind of doing query after query after query and putting them together to find these people. Now, if you're doing performance measures or quality measures, you also have to think about eligibility, because as an organization that's trying to get paid for providing good diabetes care, the metrics are very, very specific. I have to find eligible members before I do my calculations. Eligible means their age is between 18 and 75, according to HEDIS, which is the Healthcare Effectiveness Data and Information Set. So this is the standard. They have to have continuous insurance, not more than 45-day gap. They have to be active in the last 24 months with 2 outpatient visits on different dates and one inpatient visit, or taking a diabetes med. They can't be pregnant. They can't have severe illness. There are various exclusions. So coming up with these constraints and putting them all together it's work. It can be tricky. So if we go to the next slide, what our customers want is really 2 things. One is they want to be able to look at last year's data. So for today, I want to look at 2021 data, which is complete between January 1 and December 31 of last year, and I want to figure out my metrics so I can get paid. So that's great, but that doesn't help me with my current patients, and it doesn't help me with the next year. For that, I want to look at operational metrics. And by operational metrics, what I mean is I want to see who today, this week, this month, last month, is in the gap. Who has poor control or good control? Which of my members need action right now? Because that's going to impact how I get paid next year, and it's going to impact the quality metrics right now. And so we want our solution to be able to support, in particular, the operational metrics, because that's one of the trickiest areas going forward. So if we go to the next slide, now I'm going to spend a few minutes and describe the solution, which is our approach to generating these member lists in a configurable and a simpler way. So for diabetes, imagine that the logic, the SQL logic, gets broken down into basic elements, and we call those elements nodes. So if you take, maybe you have a node for whether they got a lab test for their kidney function, and another node for a retinal eye exam, another one for blood pressure. And so you define these nodes, and actually InterSystems is defining these nodes so that you don't have to. Look, we'll give you a starter set. And so we create a node for each of the elements that's important in the diabetes model. And we also create a node for every metric. So on the right-hand side, we create a node which will count up the members who have, who are overdue for a hemoglobin A1C test, or overdue for a retinal exam, blood pressure check, or kidney screen, a single node for each of those things. So the nodes underneath them have SQL statements, and the nodes point at the relational data in Health Insight, although they can also point at other data sources as needed. And the nodes also include parameters that make them very easy to change. So you can change a date range or change an age range just by modifying those parameters. So if we go to the next slide, once those nodes are created, the nodes are grouped together in something called a path. And so here, there's a path that ends with node 16, and node 16 is the place that indicates that the members on this list are overdue for a hemoglobin A1C test. We call that a terminal node in a path. The other nodes in the path set up the conditions for that. So the first node says, are they 18 to 75 with no significant insurance gap? The next one says, have they had the kind of visit history that's important? The next one says, have they had or not had the A1C test, and was it within 6 months, the next node 11? And when you group all those together, the collection of those nodes is called a path, and that's what gives us the information about who's overdue and who's not overdue for a hemoglobin A1C test. So if you think about it, the diabetes model, if we went back and looked at the earlier slides, you'd see that there's really about 8 different important paths, because we've got these gap measures and these control measures. We put them all together in a single model. That model has 24 nodes in it, has about 21 paths in it, and we run that all at once. So after you run this model, you have the answer to all of the questions relating to HEDIS diabetes care. So if we go to the next slide, what I'm now going to do is show you a little bit about the visualization of that using the software that is being developed. So the first picture I'll show you is going to show you the model itself. And then the next picture I show you will show you the counts that result from running the model. So if we can flip to the browser view and open up the model, let's see if that'll work. And you'll have to tell me if I'm going to see that or not see that.
I don't think you're going to see it, but everyone in the room does see the first model SVG.
Okay, great. Then I will try to describe it without seeing it and have you follow along. And just give me 1 second so I'm on a similar page on my screen. Okay, so on the model page, you'll see the nodes. The nodes are in blue if they are source nodes. That is, they have SQL behind them and they're pointing at source data in Health Insight. And then they have connection lines with yeses and nos that indicate paths. So you can see node 1, and then below that node 7, node 9 and 8, below that node 2. And if you just hover over, say, node 9, you'll see that there's detail beneath this, which includes, hard to read, I'm sure, but it includes SQL code, because this node is, when it's executed, is going to produce a list of members who satisfy having a diabetes prescription that was filled in the last 24 months. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom of this screen, you should see some pink nodes, which are terminal nodes. And so on the far left-hand side, you'll see node 13 and 14 and 15, and then up and to the right, 16, 18, and so on. And these nodes all represent the terminal nodes. So if we look on the right at the bottom where it says node 23, you'll see that that's a testing gap. That says that blood pressure testing is overdue, or that a blood pressure result was high. And so the members that find themselves satisfying that node are going to be in the gap, and that's a list of members that you might want to take action on. You might want to pass that off to care coordination staff or a primary PCP team so that they can contact that patients on those lists and do something about it. If you hover over node 23, also a little hard to read, it says paths for this terminal node, and there's a bunch of them because as I explained earlier, there are a number of paths built into the model, and this will actually show you sort of how that works. So now I'm going to show you that this is the tool or part of the tool we use when we're designing the model. And now we're going to flip over to a different screen and show what happens after we run the model. So now we're going to see the same nodes, but without the lines. And what we're looking at now are the counts that are associated after running this against your data. Now, this was run against test data, so these numbers are a little bit, they reflect the test data only. But you can see, for example, in the top that node 1 had a count of 31 members, and the next node 7 had a count of 952 members. And if we scroll all the way down to the bottom right and look at node 23, there were 221 members who were in the gap for blood pressure testing. And if you hover over that, you can see that that was generated from, the path called G5 and the path called K5, which were at the bottom of that screen. So I'm going to ask that we go back over to the slides now, and we can come back to this later if that's helpful for discussion. So going over to the next slide. So this slide shows the more important output of the model, which is a table that you can use for creating reports and dashboards using kind of your favorite BI tools. So if you use Tableau or Power BI or Excel, whatever. So this is an example of the tabular output of the model, which shows for each row is a patient or a member. Those are the green boxes. And then each column is a different metric. So some of the metrics, like the middle one, says that these folks were in the testing gap for kidney testing or nephropathy. And there were 446 members in that gap based on this particular table. And then off to the right, there are additional columns that are not shown that are used for dimensional analysis. So for example, you could add in zip codes, or you could put in provider names, or you could put in insurance type or insurance product. So anything that you might want to use to slice and dice the data can be added into the output table, and that will produce the model with which members correspond with which columns of information. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to point out that the model is flexible, and in this example, what we've done is said, let's take the 24 nodes for diabetes, and instead let's just take a subset of those, because we're only interested in the kind of the clinical side of this, not the HEDIS exclusion piece. And so we can easily build a model and run a model. Took about an hour to create this from the existing nodes. We'll go to the next slide. So what I want to leave you with is that we are developing this capability with a number of kind of assumptions or principles behind it. One is that as long as you're running Iris, you should be able to use this tool. So HealthShare 2020.1, Health Insight on that version, even just Iris tables themselves can be run using these nodes and using the SQL code that's in the nodes. So the data sources are flexible. We haven't nailed down the licensing approach, but what we're thinking is that there will be a license for the product itself that runs the code, but we're not sure whether that will be included or will be an add-on compared to Health Insight or other HealthShare components. The templates that I mentioned, so we, for example, are producing the diabetes model, and we will hand that to you as a customer as a template, which you can then adapt for your use. And we're still working out how that's going to work. We know also that when you adapt the template for your use, then that will be very specific to your data and your business needs. And you can even use the product to create a brand new from scratch model that we haven't given you. And we believe that those will be owned by you and not something that would be licensed. So there's limited availability right now because we're in a proof of concept. We are not yet a product, but we're moving towards that and hope to have something ready for release by the end of 2023. And then the next slide, which is my last, is just to summarize that I think the key takeaways are we are building a tool for creating member lists or cohorts that are driven by the data in Health Insight, but also the data that comes from other data sources. It's a modular, flexible, visual approach. The idea is to make it no code or low code as far as editing the models and configuring the models. It's intended to be modular in terms of reusing nodes and paths in being able to share and start with templates to accelerate the work. And the visual approach should help a lot with not only verifying that the design you have is what you want and expect, but also communicating the model, because a lot of different stakeholders care about how these things work and need to kind of verify and validate them. Analytics is a team sport. And so we think that the visual approach is very important. And my last sort of request is we'd love to learn from you how member lists are important to you, which ones are the most important, which ones are giving you trouble or challenges, and what kind of challenges you're having so that we can understand how to provide the most value. I'm available by email, john.wald@intersystems.com. John is Jon. And my colleague, Ray Zhou, is in the room, as well as Ben. And you can certainly approach them as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Ben in the discussion. And thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Can we get a quick round of applause to John? And I'd also like a very quick round of applause, or not so quick, for the presentation experts who were able to bring John all the way from Cambridge here to Seattle. Great. So we have about 11 minutes for Q&A. I can answer questions about Health Insight, and Ray, here in the front, can you stand up, Ray, real quick? Sorry. Ray can answer questions about Health Insight solutions. And John, I believe, is still on the line as well. So any questions?
Yes, I can answer questions, just as long as I can hear them.
Sure. So any questions, please raise your hand, and Zach will come with the microphone.
We hear about the diabetic POC. Do you guys have any other such POC in line, or
like anything else coming up in the near future?
Sorry, I didn't hear the first portion. Which POC are you talking about?
The diabetic POC, you are coming up with the next version. So is there any other data modeling, means any other like SDOH or any other you're coming up in the near future as well? Or at least you have anything planned out for next version?
Again, I'm
If
sorry.
that's-
Oh, sorry, John, you go first.
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, so you talked about the diabetic POC, right? Which you are planning
Yes.
to come up with the next version. So my question is, do you have any other such dashboard which is out of the box available with Health Insight in the future?
Yes, I can answer that. The first one we're working on is diabetes. The next one we're working on is cardiovascular measures, also inspired by HEDIS quality measures. And we're sort of open after that. So we don't have that mapped out exactly yet, but we are interested in where to go next.
Oh, I heard neonatal thrown out. Actually, I think that would be an excellent use case.
So I have a question about the optimization and data ingestion. So I've seen in the field that some of the very large patient SDAs, like it would take hours for it to flow into a Health Insight, and also holds up the queues for this type of ingestion. Is there any specific improvement in dealing with such large, aggregated patient record, or with this index service, this is no longer relevant? Or is it a different approach?
I don't know at this time of any optimizations that are particularly for these very large patients. I do think that the horizontal scaling will help with that, so that instead of having one very large patient hold up the entire pipeline, that can occupy one of the pipelines, and then the other 5, 6, 7, however they may be, can improve. But at this time, I'm not aware of any optimization specifically for handling very large patients. Cool. Any other questions?
So you mentioned that Sharding's not production ready for Health Insight. Do you know when to expect it to be ready? You don't have any clients running in production?
So, well, I can tell you that tomorrow there's going to be a presentation from Northwell.
I'm from
Northwell. So we do have Northwell, who is a customer who went above and beyond, took on some responsibility themselves. They do have their own version of Sharding implemented. I see a hand from Matt before I go on further. Matt?
We have a couple of customers, Northwell being one of them, that are running Health Insight in a sharded configuration. This is something that we put together for them. We support them as product. And then we are looking to turn that into a repeatable model that we can make available to all of our customers. And that is the goal of the effort with product.
He said it's thanks to Simon, so thank you, Simon Shaw. Any other questions or any other comments? Cool. I don't see any more hands. So again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, John, for presenting. Thank you, presentation team.